When a grieving widow hesitantly pushes open a door she's never dared cross in 48 years, she expects nothing more than memories of familiar routines. But as she discovers a locked drawer filled with surveillance photographs from Cold War Berlin, and one image reveals a name that shatters everything, her quiet life is thrown into chaos, igniting a desperate quest to understand the hidden, courageous past of the man she thought she knew. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you believe in the power of quiet heroism to transform lives, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Nora had lived quietly and contentedly for 73 years. She and Thomas were the sort of couple people barely noticed in a crowd, never flashy, never stirring up trouble. They occupied a modest home in a suburban area just outside London, where they enjoyed a humble but comforting routine. In their younger days, she worked as a part-time school assistant, and he claimed to do small administrative tasks for the army until his official retirement in the mid-1960s. No children arrived to fill the house with noise, which was a source of sorrow in their early marriage but gradually became a fact they accepted without bitterness. Their bond was strong enough without that particular blessing. She remembered the day she met Thomas at a local coffee shop near her workplace. She had been just out of her teens, unsure of the world, saving her money to help her aging parents. He was a few years older, charming in a soft-spoken way, standing out from the crowd only by how intently he seemed to notice his surroundings. The conversation sparked easily, his quiet wit balancing her slight shyness. When he mentioned he'd served in the army, she assumed it was a standard national service. He was vague about details, but something in his eyes told her not to press. He was calm, thoughtful, occasionally drifting into a watchful silence that she found oddly reassuring. Within a year, they married in a simple ceremony, celebrating with a handful of friends and family. Life with Thomas was comfortable. She found him to be a steady partner. He rose early, did the shopping, helped neighbors fix small things around their houses. In the evenings, they would sit side by side in the living room, she with a book, he with the newspaper. Occasionally, he'd make an offhand remark about the Cold War or some foreign affair, showing more insight than the average man on the street. She figured it was a holdover from his army days. It didn't occur to her that he might have once been more deeply involved than any ordinary soldier or clerk. He never made a fuss about having a separate study. The door was always half open, as if to say, "I'm not hiding anything, but I'd like my private space." In truth, Nora never felt the urge to pry. She was content with the life they built, free of drama or secrets. Or so she believed. Their arguments were minor: what color to paint the bedroom walls, whether it was wise to drive at night in bad weather. She occasionally teased him for stashing old receipts in a particular battered filing box, but he would just smile and say, "You never know when one might need them. Better safe than sorry." She brushed it off as a quirk. Quiet men sometimes lived by quiet rules. Then he fell ill in his early 70s, a gradual decline that began with shortness of breath and led to a diagnosis of congestive heart failure. Nora stayed at his side through hospital visits and specialist appointments, soothing him with cups of tea, though he rarely admitted pain or fear. Instead, he would give her that same gentle smile, as if to say everything was under control. She tried to be strong, but it weighed on her. The day he passed was abrupt and painless, so the doctor said. He simply slipped away in his sleep 3 days ago, leaving behind that locked drawer of mysteries she'd never thought to question. Now she stood in his study, the air tinged with the faint smell of his cologne. The desk was large, oak, polished to a sheen that reflected the morning light. She noticed the bottom drawer had a small brass lock. She'd known it existed, yet never tried to open it. She found her fingers curling around the handle. It didn't budge. She felt something flutter in her chest, an unfamiliar tension, like stepping onto a stage unprepared. She closed her eyes, telling herself that maybe it was just old financial records, but a whisper of doubt told her there might be more. For 3 days, that drawer and its lock preyed on her mind. She found herself wandering the house in a daze, half expecting Thomas to materialize and tease her for being so curious. Nightmares disrupted her sleep, vague images of him standing in a snowy street, camera in hand, watching people she didn't recognize. She would wake unsettled, wishing she had the nerve to talk to someone, but she was unsure who to trust. She tried to focus on practical matters, scheduling a modest funeral, thanking neighbors for their sympathy, writing notes of thanks for flowers. Yet the memory of that locked drawer tugged at her. On the morning of the funeral, she recalled how Thomas loved Dickens, especially A Tale of Two Cities. He owned several copies, one of which was quite worn. She retrieved it from a bookshelf in the bedroom, hoping to hold something that carried his imprint. When she flipped through, she realized certain pages were stuck. With a gentle tug, she opened the book to discover a hollowed-out section. Her breath caught. Tucked inside was a small key. It was so classic Thomas, clandestine, yet done with a neat, careful hand. After the funeral, once the last mourner had departed and the house grew still, she mustered the courage to unlock the drawer. Her heart pounded. She expected dusty ledgers or perhaps private letters. Instead, she found two neat stacks of old black and white photographs, each labeled in his precise handwriting. Berlin, 1963. Something in her sank. Berlin, she recalled, was a city he'd never mentioned visiting. And 1963 was thick in the Cold War era, a time that felt far from the ordinary existence they'd shared. Sitting down, she sifted through the images. They showed everyday scenes in Berlin. Snowy streets, people bustling around railway stations, couples strolling in Tiergarten Park, an older man in a heavy coat fumbling with a newspaper. Except every image seemed carefully observed, as if the photographer was documenting unsuspecting strangers. Red circles were drawn around certain faces, with names scrawled in German or English. One or two were circled and marked, suspected defector. Another read, possible contact. She felt a chill. These were not holiday snaps. They were surveillance photos, gathered methodically. She flipped more quickly, scanning for any clue that might tie her husband to this. Her fingers trembled when she found a particular photograph near the bottom of the second stack. A young woman, slender, standing by a bookshop as snow drifted around her. She seemed unaware she was being observed. Nora looked closely at the woman's face. Wide, almond-shaped eyes, something about them reminiscent of Thomas's steady gaze. Turning it over, she read, Anneliese, February 14th, 63. Tiergarten. An asterisk was drawn in the corner. Why that date, Valentine's Day, she wondered. And what was the significance of the woman? Nora sat there for an hour, her thoughts chaotic. She recalled every time Thomas had grown quiet during Cold War documentaries, the introspective way he'd watch them. She once asked if it reminded him of his army days, but he just sighed and changed the channel. All this time he had carried these images. They were old, but clearly important enough to lock away. Unable to bear the weight alone, she called her cousin Malcolm. Though they hadn't been close in recent years, Malcolm once worked as a military archivist. If anyone could shed light on what these photos represented, it was him. She didn't want to involve anyone else. Her immediate circle of friends either wouldn't understand or would gossip. But Malcolm was discreet, and he owed her a favor or two from their younger days. He arrived the next afternoon, offering condolences and a sympathetic ear. She made tea, her hands shaking as she laid out the photographs on the kitchen table. Malcolm, a tall, slender man in his late 60s with reading glasses perched on his nose, studied them with a methodical calm. As he pored over each shot, his face grew serious. He tapped one with a red circle around a man's face. I recognized that name, Johannes Weber. He was rumored to be an East German intelligence officer. Why would Thomas have this photograph? And these notes? They look like official references to code names. Her throat felt tight. You think it was all part of some intelligence operation? Thomas told me he left the army in '64. He never mentioned Berlin. Malcolm's eyes flicked up to hers, a mixture of sympathy and resolve in his expression. This kind of labeling, especially with the mention of Americans, Brits, and Germans, suggests a cross-border espionage scenario. I suspect these are MI6 or something akin. I can check newly declassified records. A lot of Cold War files have been released in the past decade. He gazed at Nora kindly. You'll want to prepare yourself. If your husband was involved in covert operations, there could be heavy secrets buried here. Despite the swirl of confusion and mild betrayal she felt, Nora couldn't deny a spark of curiosity. She needed answers, so she nodded. Please do whatever you can. I have to know. Malcolm returned 2 days later, carrying a laptop and a stack of printed pages. He set them down carefully, as though the weight of the information might crush them both. I found references to an operation codenamed Wainscot, run by British intelligence in Berlin between 1962 and 1964. The mission was to track double agents, defectors, and potential leaks. It was hush-hush, known to only a handful. One name popped up, Shutterglass, a field operative known for photographic surveillance. He was never identified in the official files, just codenamed. The date range lines up perfectly with those photos dated 1963. Nora listened, breath shallow. You think Thomas was Shutterglass? Malcolm paused, letting the question hover. The evidence is pointing there. I can't confirm absolutely, but the type of photos you have, the location, the style of documentation, it matches. And your husband's army record, which ended around 64, might have been a cover for intelligence work. He flipped through the documents. Shutterglass was assigned to photograph potential turncoats, stolen technology couriers, and Soviet assets who might flip. Some of these code names match the scribbles on the backs of your photos. She stared at the pictures, newly aware of their gravity. Then he was an MI6 agent? That's my best guess, Malcolm said softly. It wasn't uncommon for certain soldiers to be recruited into intelligence if they showed aptitude for observation or language skills. He moved a photograph closer to Nora. The question is, who is Annalise? Nora's voice shook. She looked so young. The notes say she was there in Tiergarten on Valentine's Day, 1963. An asterisk. Could that mean something personal to him? She swallowed hard, bracing for a darker possibility. Was she just someone he followed? Or more? Malcolm offered a gentle shrug. Hard to say. I'll dig further, but it may be an emotional tie. Often, field operatives formed close bonds with contacts or sources. Sometimes they had to manipulate them, or sometimes they truly cared about them. The lines were blurry. Nora felt a pang of fear that maybe her marriage was built on partial truths. But she also recalled how devoted Thomas was to her, how steady their bond felt. She refused to jump to conclusions. She thanked Malcolm for his help, and after he left, she spent the evening in her living room, gazing at the photograph of Annalise. The woman's eyes carried a certain vulnerability. Nora wondered if Thomas had been drawn to protect her or if he had used her for information. She dreaded either conclusion but could not turn away from the truth. Over the following days, Malcolm continued his archival digging. Nora busied herself sorting through Thomas's affairs. The house felt emptier than ever, as though the ghosts of the past had replaced Thomas's physical warmth. Each time she tried to imagine him in a spy's role, meeting informants, crossing dangerous borders, she struggled to align it with the gentle man who crocheted scarves for her in the winter and insisted on making her favorite porridge when she felt ill. Had he carried that weight alone? At last, Malcolm arrived with a partial breakthrough. He showed Nora a newly uncovered document, a reference to one Annalise Voss, reportedly the daughter of a mid-level Soviet officer stationed in East Germany, suspected of passing intel to British operatives. The note said she was recruited in 1963, then vanished in early 1964, presumed dead or exiled. Nora felt her heart twist. The woman in the photograph might have died, perhaps because of betrayal or exposure. She whispered, could Thomas have been responsible for that? Did he cause her to vanish? Malcolm's expression was sympathetic. We can't be sure. Sometimes assets fled under new identities. Others were captured. If your husband was Shutterglass, he might have documented her movements or even helped arrange her extraction. Or if something went wrong, she might have been found by the wrong people. He hesitated. But there's another possibility. Maybe he saved her. If she was working with the Brits, an asterisk might indicate a priority for rescue. Nora latched onto that possibility. Thomas's gentleness suggested that if he could have saved someone in danger, he would have. She clung to that hope, but the questions weighed heavily. Had he loved Annalise in some way? The date, February 14th, 63, seemed too pointed to be a coincidence. She recalled how Thomas never made a fuss about Valentine's Day. Could it be he was reminded of something painful every time the holiday came around? 3 days later, a plain envelope arrived in Nora's post, unaddressed. She opened it, puzzled. Inside was a single slip of paper bearing a typed message. He kept his promise. She made it out. A. The handwriting below that line was distinctly feminine, each letter carefully looped. Nora's pulse raced. She showed it to Malcolm, who recognized that the style might match older German penmanship. Possibly from the same A for Annalise? But if so, how was she alive and writing now, decades later? Or was it someone on her behalf? Malcolm decided to re-examine the locked drawer, rifling through any corners Nora might have missed. He discovered a small envelope tucked between the drawer's slats, addressed simply to T. Inside was a letter in German. He read it aloud in English for Nora. If anything happens, tell her I did all I could. She's alive and has a family. She never knew who helped her escape. That was always my wish. Don't search for her. Let her live the life I couldn't provide. And tell Nora, I never carried secrets, only promises. T. For Thomas, presumably. Nora wept, partly from relief that her husband's involvement was benevolent and partly from sorrow that he'd borne this alone. He had apparently arranged Annalise's safe passage out of East Berlin. She'd lived, never knowing the identity of her rescuer. And Thomas, after finishing that mission, must have returned to England and left that line of work behind for good. The letter was heartbreakingly simple, revealing his hope that Annalise would have the life she deserved, while he devoted himself to Nora. The final line about carrying promises, not secrets, cut her deeply. It was the first moment she understood that Thomas's secrecy was not about betraying her, but about protecting others, and possibly sparing her from the moral burdens of that era. She found herself sobbing in Malcolm's arms, not from heartbreak, but from a complicated blend of pride and grief. She recalled how, in their many decades of marriage, Thomas had occasional nightmares he never explained. She imagined the images that haunted him. Sneaking someone across a checkpoint, forging papers, dodging watchers, also a woman with those almond eyes might be free. She whispered an apology for ever doubting him. With that letter, some sense of resolution settled in. Yet Nora felt a quiet drive to confirm the final fate of Annalise. She admitted to Malcolm that if the typed note said she made it out, perhaps Annalise had lived a full life. Could they find her, or learn what became of her? Malcolm, ever meticulous, kept searching through less official sources. He combed through genealogical sites, refugee registries, obituaries in German and Danish newspapers. Many Eastern Europeans fled to neutral or safer countries. After weeks, he finally uncovered a Cold War registry entry. Annalise Voss, born in 1941, entered Denmark in 1964 under special circumstances, died peacefully in 2001. The record indicated no spouse. One child, Marcus Voss, born in late 1963, father unknown. Nora stared at the printout of that record for a long time. If Annalise gave birth in late 1963, that might mean she was pregnant around the time Thomas's photo was taken. She wondered if that had spurred the urgency of her extraction. Had Thomas known she was pregnant? Could the father have been some other operative or a Soviet official? Or a thought she dared not dwell on. Might it have been Thomas himself? She had no evidence to confirm or deny that, and in her heart, she believed Thomas had always been faithful to her, but she couldn't entirely dismiss the timeline. She asked Malcolm for guidance. Should I try to contact this Marcus? Would that betray Thomas's wish to let Annalise live her own life? Malcolm replied gently, Annalise is gone now, but perhaps her son might want to know that a British man saved her. It could give him closure or deeper understanding of his mother's past. The typed note from a suggests someone is aware you've discovered all this. That might indicate an invitation, in a sense. Nora deliberated for days. Ultimately, she felt it was the right thing to do. She penned a careful letter to the address listed in the Danish registry. She explained that she was the widow of a man who once served in Berlin and might have aided Annelies's escape. She included no incriminating details, only that she believed her husband had done something heroic to save Ms. Voss. She asked if Marcus would be open to meeting, or if he preferred to leave the past undisturbed. She held her breath as she posted it, uncertain if it would even reach him after so many years. Weeks passed. The quiet house seemed less oppressive, though she still felt pangs of loss. She kept the photograph of Annelies on her mantel beside one of Thomas in his younger days, uncertain why it felt right to place them together. She found herself speaking aloud sometimes, as if Thomas could hear. "You did a noble thing. I'm proud of you." She suspected he had carried guilt, too, knowing that if something had gone awry, lives could be ruined. She wished he had confided in her, so she could share his burden. Then again, maybe she would have spent her life worrying about retribution or being found by old foes. Finally, a letter arrived from Copenhagen. Inside was a polite note in English, thanking her for reaching out and expressing curiosity about her story. It was signed by Marcus Voss. He wrote that his mother rarely spoke of her past, only admitting she fled East Berlin with help from a good stranger. He had no illusions about the complexities of that era but was open to hearing more. He invited Nora to visit him for a conversation, if she felt comfortable traveling. Despite her 73 years, Nora felt an upsurge of determination. She confided in Malcolm, who offered to accompany her, but she declined, wanting to face this on her own. She booked a flight and found herself in Copenhagen on a brisk, gray afternoon, checking into a small hotel near the harbor. She was nervous. She carried a sealed envelope with Annelies's photo, along with a short letter explaining Thomas's role, carefully phrased to avoid revealing deep intelligence secrets. She also brought the note from Thomas, the one that ended with "I never carried secrets, only promises." She met Marcus in a cozy cafe near an old canal. He was in his 50s, tall, with a gentle bearing that reminded her so much of Thomas it almost made her cry. His English was excellent, and his manner was courteous but clearly laced with anticipation. He asked how she had discovered his mother's name, why she believed her husband was involved. She spoke quietly, recounting the locked drawer, the surveillance photographs, the puzzle pieces leading to the conclusion that Thomas had arranged an extraction for Annelies. Marcus listened with rapt attention, occasionally nodding. At one point, Nora slid the photograph across the table, the one of Annelies in the snowy street, labeled with date and place. Marcus picked it up, eyes widening at how young and vulnerable his mother looked. He whispered, "She told me she left Berlin in '64, pregnant and alone. She said a stranger with connections ensured safe passage, but she never knew his name. Sometimes she called him the angel I never saw. She lived quietly in Denmark, teaching languages. She never married, focusing on raising me." He paused, voice trembling. "She died believing she owed her life to a nameless benefactor." Nora blinked tears away. "Thomas, my husband, was that benefactor. He wanted her to have a future free from the danger of Soviet retribution. He also told no one, not even me, until I found these clues." She fumbled with the letter from Thomas and read a piece of it. "She never knew who helped her escape. That was always my wish." Marcus lowered his head, overcome. After a moment, he asked if Nora believed Thomas and Annelies had been romantically involved. She admitted she didn't know. The documents suggested a deep concern for her safety, but there was no direct evidence of a love affair. Possibly it was compassion or a sense of moral duty. Possibly more. She left that question open, not wanting to tarnish or overcomplicate Thomas's memory. Marcus took her hand in a gesture of gratitude. "You've given me something precious. My mother carried an invisible burden of gratitude all her life. Now I have a name for it, for him. Please accept my thanks on her behalf." Nora's heart swelled with relief. She told him that she wasn't looking to unravel their personal lives further, only to give him a piece of the puzzle if he wanted it. He nodded, gazing at the photograph with misty eyes. "I wish she could have known who saved her, but maybe it's best. She lived in peace. They talked for hours about the realities of East Berlin, how his mother rarely spoke of her father, the Soviet officer, or the circumstances that led her to become an informant for British intelligence. Nora sensed a mirror to her own ignorance of Thomas's life. They parted that evening with an embrace, promising to keep in touch. She felt a gentle warmth in her chest, a certainty that she had honored Thomas's memory by sharing the truth. Returning to her hotel, Nora stared out the window at the moonlit water. She thought about how, for so many years, she believed she knew every corner of Thomas's soul. Now, discovering he had lived through a dangerously noble chapter of espionage, she felt even closer to him. His capacity for sacrifice and moral conviction only heightened her love for him, rather than diminishing it. She regretted he hadn't confided in her, but she understood. Knowledge of his actions might have put them both in peril. The Cold War was a brutal stage where small missteps could have monstrous consequences. When she flew back to England, she carried in her heart the confirmation that Anneliese and her child had thrived. The sense of peace that knowledge gave her was profound. In her living room, she placed a new photograph next to her wedding portrait, a reprint of the one featuring Anneliese smiling faintly in the Berlin snow. Beneath it, Nora wrote in neat script, "The truth doesn't undo the love. The love carried the truth." It was her personal credo now, a testament to the complexities of Thomas's life and the depth of their bond. In the following months, she contacted Malcolm to give him the updates. He was thrilled that she'd found closure. He asked if she was willing to let him publish a small academic article on Operation Wainscot, omitting personal details but incorporating the broad strokes. Nora hesitated. She remembered Thomas's note, "Don't search for her. Let her live the life I couldn't provide." He had also said, "I never carried secrets, only promises." She told Malcolm, "Perhaps it's best we keep it to ourselves. We know enough to honor his memory. Let the official archives remain fragmentary." Malcolm respected her choice, concluding that not all stories needed to be exposed in full detail. Life took on a quieter, steadier rhythm for Nora. She still missed Thomas every waking moment, but she felt a calm sense of pride. She understood that he had not lied to her. Rather, he had safeguarded a promise that extended beyond their marriage, ensuring that an innocent woman and her unborn child would escape a dangerous regime. She would often stand in his study, the door now fully open, running her fingers across the desk. She kept the locked drawer empty, the key in a small dish on top, a symbol of how she had unlocked his secrets and found them to be acts of love and conscience. She also noticed small details that had once meant nothing but now glowed with meaning. The faint scarring on Thomas's left shoulder that he attributed to a training accident, perhaps something more sinister from his time in Berlin. The old camera in the attic that he never used after the mid-60s, he said it was broken, but maybe he'd simply put it aside when that chapter closed. A certain tension would pass over his face whenever someone at a gathering spoke passionately about the moral absolutes of the Cold War, as if he knew firsthand how gray that moral ground could be. She recognized these as glimpses of a man who carried more weight than he ever revealed. Occasionally, she daydreamed about how Thomas might react if he knew she had discovered the truth. She imagined him smiling gently, relief in his eyes. Maybe he'd hold her hand and say, "Thank you for understanding." She liked to think that in his final moments, he found peace, believing no further harm would come from his old mission, that the people he saved were free and safe. She, in turn, found a sense of wholeness in fitting the final puzzle piece into the mosaic of their life together. She wrote a letter to Marcus, in which she expressed her gratitude for meeting him and offered to keep in touch if he had further questions about the father figure he never knew or the rescue that shaped his existence before birth. Marcus wrote back a short but heartfelt note, describing how he felt renewed closeness to his late mother's memory. He even visited the UK briefly on business, and they met for lunch. The meeting was friendly, with no illusions of a deeper family tie. Yet they both found solace in the knowledge that love, in some form, had bridged the chasms of war and time. Sometimes, Nora still wondered if Thomas might have been Marcus's father. The timeline allowed it, but there was no conclusive evidence. She decided it didn't matter. Thomas had given enough of himself to ensure that child would be born into a freer world. That act alone was a fatherly compassion, if not literal paternity. She concluded that some questions are best left unanswered, because their answers would change nothing about the love she felt for him. She admired him all the more for the risk he took and the secrecy he maintained to protect them all. Years slipped by and Nora, now well into her 70s, found that talking about Thomas's hidden role became easier. She confided discreetly in a trusted friend or two, leaving out specifics. Each time, she was met with astonishment. "I never would have guessed. He was so unassuming." She would smile softly, replying, "Yes, but that was his nature. He did extraordinary things without telling a soul." She saw how it illuminated the quiet heroism that can exist in unremarkable corners of the world. Some people fought with guns and grand speeches. Thomas fought with a camera and a willingness to help one frightened woman escape tyranny. On the anniversary of Thomas's death, Nora visited his grave with lilies. He always liked lilies, said they reminded him of fresh starts. She laid them gently on the grass, brushing away some fallen leaves from the tombstone. She stood in silence for a long while, recalling the day she found the key inside A Tale of Two Cities. She closed her eyes and murmured, "I still love you, even more now that I understand." The cemetery was still, the sky overcast. She felt no heaviness, only a gentle reverence for the path he chose. She believed that some loves are forged in the quiet space between secrets and devotion, and that was enough for her. The final measure of her acceptance came when she wrote a short memoir, not for publication but for her private record. She recounted how she discovered the photographs, how Malcolm assisted her, how she met Marcus in Copenhagen. She described her fear, her heartbreak, her eventual pride in Thomas. In the last lines, she wrote, "Sometimes, the most profound truths slip through our lives without making a sound. When I learned the truth, it felt like light pouring into a room I thought was already bright. Now I see that he never betrayed me. He simply carried a promise, heavy and invisible, safeguarding both past and future with quiet courage." She placed the memoir in the study's desk drawer, now perpetually unlocked, next to the empty space where the photographs once lay. She kept the original prints in a small archival box, with his letter and the typed note from everything neatly labeled. If someday a relative or a historian stumbled upon them, they might piece together a saga of espionage and rescue. But for now, it remained a personal testament to the interplay of secrets and love. In the end, she concluded that the line dividing a quiet life from an extraordinary legacy can be thinner than a hair. Thomas had lived humbly, never seeking accolades, never letting pride overshadow his daily presence as a husband who made her tea in the mornings and warmed her slippers by the fire in winter. Yet behind that modest exterior lay a chapter of risk, loyalty, and moral fortitude, an entire life's worth of silent heroism. Nora took comfort in the knowledge that the love they shared was not undone by hidden truths, but perhaps made all the more remarkable by them. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the story, give this video a like if you haven't already and subscribe for more.